It's Tuesday at 2 p.m. and we are back with a Gather podcast. This is actually take two because I accidentally didn't hit the record button the first time. And my wonderful guest, Alina, is with me and she's laughing because we just spent the first 5 minutes talking to no one. But everyone is here now and we are absolutely recording. The button is red, the recording is happening. Welcome, Alina. How are you feeling? Thank you so much
Thanks,
for being here.
Maria. That was really funny. And talking to no one is my specialty. I'm a New York City public school teacher. This is my day to day. But thank you so much for having me. As I said before, I'm so excited to be here. This is such a cool opportunity. I never thought I'd be on a poetry podcast or any podcast, really. So I just like a heartfelt thank you to you for the invitation.
Oh, that means so much. I'm so glad you're here. I feel like this is just like the perfect, we were saying right before we hit record, the perfect imperfect place for poets just to come together and like chat about their life um and I think also sometimes when we're sharing about our life, whether we anticipated being like on a podcast at one point or not, things come when they're meant to come, right? And so perhaps
Absolutely.
to everyone listening right now that is a poet or writing, just know that like the right things will come your way, and perhaps saying yes to those opportunities can create awesome other insights for other people. And I'm already rambling and we haven't even started.
That was a pretty insightful ramble, though.
Thank you, Alina. This is not about me though. I'm curious to hear about your upbringing and sort of what brought you to poetry and how you ended up where you are right now, all the way from you being born to where you are now. Let's get into
I can't go too far back. That would take forever. But so I was born in Soviet Russia, and my family immigrated here to New York City when I was about 8 years old. And we landed in Queens. We had some family living here who helped us out when we first got here. But we really basically came with nothing, no language, no understanding of the culture. But it's just like my parents hoped for a better life for us, just like most, I think, immigrant families. And I grew up in Queens. I was lucky enough to go to school and not have to work. My parents both worked to support us. And growing up I feel like I had a pretty typical, angsty childhood. We could get into that a little later, I guess.
it.
And I got into like my love of literature and writing, I think, earlier on, because I spent a lot of my time with books as a kid. I think it had to do with me not really having a lot of outlets for like friendships because of the language barrier. My grandmother was also a literature professor in Russia, and I think that I always just kind of like found value in having books around me, and the library just became like a place that felt safe. So I remember taking like a stack of books out. I didn't really understand what I was reading at the time, but I would spend my summers, especially, just like plowing through them. And I think it created kind of like a relationship to literature that I wasn't writing yet, but I felt the power of words.
Oh.
And in high school, I got a little more into the creative side of things. I like was part of a literary magazine, and I wrote my share of kind of crappy poetry, high school poetry about hating my parents and breakups and all the typical stuff. But it wasn't like a real passion. It was just something that I felt like I liked to do, and I liked playing with words. It was a lot of just wordplay for me at the time. And in college, I kind of went along with the theme of wanting to be around books, wanting to be around literature, and I majored in English lit. And then about 2 years into my major, I was just sort of like, well, what am I going to do with this? Like, am I going to be like a professional reader? Like, what do people do? What do people do with an English lit major? Like, I love it, but what's the practicality in it, right? So, of course, I ended up kind of tacking on like a very, practical use for it. And I minored in secondary education.
Mm.
Um, and I actually initially wanted to be a child psychotherapist. Um, like that was like my calling to want to be around kids. I think I was coming from like a really misunderstood place at the time, and I wanted to be the person that understood kids and was there for them. And then I realized it would be like 10 years of schooling and then like residency and all the stuff that people in the medical field have to deal with. I'm like, no, I need to start earning money. This can't happen. So teaching it was, and I've actually been a teacher for 20 years now. I started really young. I was lucky enough to get a job right out of college. And yeah, haven't looked back. Like I said before, I teach in the New York City public school system. And I you've probably spoken to teachers before, and you are a teacher in many ways as well, with your gather workshops that you lead, but you end up learning a lot being a teacher. It's like the most beautiful irony of the whole thing. You learn through teaching. And so I think I landed in the right place.
Oh, I love that. I think it's what you touched on very early on, and that was really important. The idea of like having a safe space when you're growing up, like just going back to that childhood, right? I really relate to. I'm an immigrant myself. My family immigrated to Canada when I was in 2004, when I was just under 5 years old, and at the time, again, there was a language barrier for me too, and I found the library to be one of those spaces that there wasn't the pressure of having to speak to anyone, right? And you didn't have to mess up your words. You could mess them up in your head as you were reading, and that's okay. Like, no one knew. you know I remember reading books and not really, again, like you mentioned, not knowing what I was reading, but for some reason it felt nice to read, and it felt nice to just immerse myself in what felt like an opening of my world. The possibilities of where you could go when you're reading were just so big and so vast. And so I really relate to that. I think we need, and children need especially, like places like that, places like the library. And I think the idea, I'm sure you've heard of it, it's going around right now a lot, about the idea of a third space, like a cultural space
Mm-hmm.
where we can go to for like even just for rest. Like the thing too, like you would go to the library, especially in the summers when we didn't have school. We'd go to the library and you could just spend like hours just foraging for books. And they used to do like little library programs at my library where like authors would come in and read their book. And I don't know, I like to think that that's such a beautiful way to grow up. As a teacher, have you noticed like a need for that in within like even within high school students? And like what have you noticed, sort of, I guess, in the love of literature and the love of reading in students?
Oh gosh. Um, so your talk about the library as a safe space reminded me of something. I must have read this somewhere, and somebody had said that the library is like the one of the last places where you can go and not be asked to buy something. And
Mhm.
aside from like maybe like out in nature. And I find that so profound because it's exactly what it is. It doesn't ask anything of you. Like you walk into any even a bookshop, right, which has its own special charm, right? You're still there kind of as a consumer, in the monetary sense. And the library is this place where you can just sit there all day and not have to buy anything. I mean, that's just like so magical in the world that like we live in, especially now. And then to answer your question, I mean, I do still hold to the um, the fact that we need books around us. I unfortunately feel like we're losing our grasp on that concept when it comes to like our children growing up with that same drive to read. I don't know if it's, my experience was so personal to me. So I can't generalize and say, in my generation, kids did this and that. I don't know, right? A lot of my friends read, but a lot of them were also doing other things. Video games, going out, to play,
Mhm.
whatever shenanigans they were getting into. And for me, it felt like growing up, books were our only, books and music really were like the way that you could, the portal, right, to a world that you could use as an escape. And the portals are like widening, and the dimensions of the different worlds we have available for children now are just like widening and widening, to the point where I think like books are no longer fun. They're work. It requires such a sustained amount of attention for a child to read and not be distracted, right, by all of the easier, much more accessible portals, right, that they have at their fingertips, literally. So, I do see, after 20 years of teaching, it's actually like a progression of kids really not having that relationship with literature. It's a chore for a lot of them. And it's not for love, it's not that they can't find a story they don't love, or they haven't, found a story that they don't love. I think it's just so much easier to click and tap your way into a different world, and why work for it, right? With that, like, you kind of like, the luxury of time is no longer there anymore for them. They just want in, and they don't want to have to kind of do the work. And again, I'm generalizing. There are so many children that I still see the love of literature. I think a lot of it starts in the home for those kids. And some kids are fortunate enough to be around, to grow up in families where there is access to books, and there is access to experiences that allow them to read, or even just the luxury of having a parent available and around, right, to read a bedtime story. I think we take for granted how much of a privilege that is. And when kids don't have access to that, I think a lot of times they don't, in their developmental like stage in life, develop a connection, right? Because it's not in isolation. Literature gives us, a story, but it's the experience around it that really solidifies our love for it, right? Whether it's because you feel safe at a library by yourself and you don't feel bothered and you don't feel the pressure to be anyone, or it's because someone you love is like holding you while you're being read to and you're hearing their voice, right? So that kind of external context, I think, creates a love of reading. And, some kids are lucky enough to get it, and I don't think a lot of them are getting it.
Yeah, and it's heartbreaking for, I think, the ones that aren't. It reminds me of something what you just talked about, kind of like the purpose of reading and how we can nurture that. It reminds me of something I saw online, and I can't remember exactly where I saw it, but maybe it was Instagram, my drug of choice, my social media of choice. And someone was talking about how one of the underrated purposes of books in general is to teach people to be empathetic. And one of the biggest ways to gain empathy for people and other walks of life and other cultures and other genders and other animals, even other worldly beings, is to learn about their world. And one of the easiest and most cost-effective ways you can learn about another person's world is by reading, because we can't all travel to these different places in the world to sort of gain a cultural or a global understanding of the vast differences that exist within us and to be empathetic towards our differences. But reading is one of the fastest shortcuts to that. And in the context of like the male loneliness epidemic that some people are talking about, it's been in the news and it's been in our Netflix shows. This person online, and I'm going to have to find the link for this and put it in the caption, because right now I feel bad not crediting them. But they were talking about how maybe one of the better ways and the more longer and sustainable ways to circumvent these feelings of misogyny from young men towards women is to get them to read more, to get them to read from a perspective of different women's lives, and just like historically and culturally gain some context about what's happening in the world, and through that gain empathy. And I was like, wow, it's almost like books have always been the answer.
Right. And we keep
power in that.
And we keep trying. I totally I agree with what you're saying. And we keep trying, I feel, as a society to like invent like bigger and better and faster and more optimized like ways of communicating and delivering information. And it's like it's sort of this like illusion of progress, right? And when we get to that point, we're like, what, wait a second, was this really progress, or we've just sort of abandoned this like very human experience that we were meant to have, and moved away, so much further away from that. And it's so interesting you bring up like the connection between boys and reading. My daughter last night, in like a rare moment of like pouring her heart out before bed, she was saying that in her class, because both my kids right now are into the Harry Potter series. They're just totally sucked in, which I love. So she's walking around in school with this like huge, I probably have it here somewhere, show it to you, like with this huge, right? And
Wow.
she's reading it and she's into it, and my kids are readers. I'm lucky that they, that they're following suit. But she says like, Mom, all the boys in my class, they're just like constantly commenting on like why I'm reading and how I can read a book that thick. And it's not that they're being mean or like bullying her for it, but it's just this genuine like curiosity, like almost like, wait, like, how are you able to do this? And when I ask them like, what do they do for fun? And most of the time the response is video games. And I think that, again, we've sort of, it's a little sad. I don't know how it happened, but there is this kind of gendering that happens very young, where nowadays, especially, where there are more girls reading than boys. And boys are a lot more, I think, a lot more likely to find that like social component in their worlds early on through video gaming. A lot of it because there's like an interactive element, right? They get to hang out with their friends, but and there's probably studies done on the value of that too, right? Everything is fine in moderation, but it's just really interesting how like the roads diverge a little bit. And I don't know how that speaks to the empathy levels, right? That result.
Yeah, I think that's like such a good point, especially even if it's not like something that has been scientifically studied, just anecdotally, like you're absolutely right. Like when I look at children, like middle school children in my life, like people that I'm related to, yeah, it's like not a really cool thing to read for boys. And I wonder if somehow, some way, maybe if we shift that, or if we attempt to somehow modify that, maybe that would result in some different outcomes, especially I think just as we're entering like high school and even like college and stuff like that. I'm curious, speaking of like motherhood and how like raising children, it sounds like you have made it an intentional thing to make sure that your children fall in love with writing and reading. Was that something that you thought about like before you had children, or was it something that teaching made you realize the importance of as you were having, like, before you had children? Maybe I should ask a question first. Were you must have been teaching before you had your children, right,
Yes.
Alina? Okay.
Yes.
And so I guess I'm just curious if you have anything to add about like what teaching did for your motherhood journey, and then also maybe vice versa as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a great question. I think I'm gonna have to do a little deep dive into my own choices now. I think, like I mentioned before, teaching is a great teacher. And I think that before I had children, I didn't really think about what kind of mother I would be. I didn't really think about my parenting style. I think it's amazing that when people can plan that out. I meet so many people who are like, well, when I have kids, X, Y, and Z, maybe they're surrounded by children, in their world, or they know people who are mothers. I really wasn't surrounded by kids outside of the classroom, the context of the classroom. And so I never really gave a lot of thought to how, like, what their upbringing would be. But I did know that when I had kids, it was a very, very special experience for a lot of reasons. But what was special about it is you have this opportunity for the first time in your life to like have something pure that you're holding. And you're in like in the literal sense, right? But also like in this sort of, I don't know, in this sort of like philosophical sense, right? You have this pure thing, and you're tasked with this question of like, what am I going to do with this pure thing, right? Like, what are the experiences I want this pure soul, right? And again, not in like a spiritual sense, but this pure thing to have. And it almost became like not like an instinctual thing. Like, all right, I don't want them to do this. I want them to do this. And books were always a positive source of energy for me. So, the very first thing I remember buying was like a bookshelf for their bedroom.
Oh.
Even before
Yeah.
they would really ever be able to fill it up, right? I kind of started to like, make sure every room in the house had a little library. And it didn't have to be an extensive library, but that in every room that they existed in my house, there was a place with books. I was very mindful about screen time and not kind of defaulting to that being something that they do earlier on. And that was a challenge because there was a lot of, there's a lot of kind of cultural pressure, like the normalization of kids getting iPads early on, right? Like it just becomes kind of this cultural thing. We're like, whatever, it's okay. It's educational. I see it at work a lot. It's okay for the kids to be on Chromebooks because it's good for them. I never bought into it. I don't demonize it. I just don't buy into it being necessary. And I think that I really wanted my kids to develop, like, take like the long road, right, with developing their imagination, and not give them shortcuts too quickly in life, because I feel like that yields that can yield problems later on, right? When you kind of when you create a shortcut for something that they're fully capable of being able to do without a shortcut, then you've kind of taken an opportunity away from them. So I just really wanted them to be around books, and I read to them, like my husband and I read to them every night, like since they were, I think, like, but they're like crying red in the face. It would be like initially just something like really, really tiny, and they had no idea what we were saying, but every night it's a routine. And I think that I'd like to think that that's why they're readers now, but
I think you're probably safe to bet that it's exactly why they're readers now. I love that. It's like all those little things, even that one night might not have, helped them become a reader, but all of those little things. Like, I love what you said about having a small little library throughout the house. And I don't have children yet, but something that I do in our house is I make it very easy and accessible to write. So I have like where I am right now is my office, and I have obviously my computer here, but I have another little desk. It's just a little makeshift desk with like one of my shitty old PCs right in our kitchen. And then on our patio, we have like a little table that also doubles as a writing desk. And I keep like notebooks. I keep my laptop goes in one place, my shitty PC goes another, and my computer in the other. And I make it as easy as I can for myself when inspiration strikes to write, because I think sometimes even those little objections, those little like that friction, a little bit of friction, like having to walk up the stairs to my office, can be enough to sometimes thwart a poem or keep a poem from coming up. And I think when you give yourself and like giving your children the highest chance of success is giving them the most amount of opportunities to read. And if a child doesn't have access to an iPad and they're beside a library, like, what are the odds they're going to pick up a book? Probably pretty
Absolutely.
damn high, right?
Yeah.
You set up the opportunities so that they will succeed. There's not really like the other option. So I'm kind
Absolutely.
of curious, like, how do you do that for yourself as a writer, and how do you create moments and pieces and pockets of time in your busy schedule for poetry? Does that happen like does that happen for you like sporadically, or is it something that you're more like routine based? Kind of what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I am not at all intentional with my own writing. I think all of my energy is spent on like curating my children's world, and then I'm like a tumbleweed. I wish I could say I had a disciplined like approach to writing. I do not. I, not for lack of opportunity. I think if I wanted to, I could set up a writing space. I just find it really difficult to focus when I'm like when I'm being tasked to focus on that on writing at any given moment. I was actually terrified to join Gather for that reason, because I thought I would kind of lock up, right? When I'm being asked to write on the spot, like my mind just draws a blank. And I mean, it's been really surprisingly the opposite of that in Gather. But for my own personal writing, I do a lot on the go. It's very much a process of like, I'm driving to work and a line strikes, and at a red light, I'm like jotting it down in my notes app. And I noticed that I do a lot of that. Like I'm a line collector.
Okay.
So, I don't know if you have a similar experience, but like I tend to kind of have these fragments that come to me a lot during the day or during the week, and they're really unrelated most of the time. And I'll just like jot them down. And then at some point, I'll sit, and again, this could be very, very spontaneous. Like I'm watching a TV show and I'm like over it, and so I'll pick up my notes app and start looking through it, and I'm like, wow, like this and that connect, and then it starts to sort of weave, and I might go in and like kind of work around it. And a lot of times I'll write my poems backwards. Like I'll start with like, I want this to be the last line, and kind of like weave it out, towards spiral it up toward the beginning. But that's how I work. I don't necessarily love working that way. I would love to be able to be more, make it really more of a ritual to sit and say, this is my half hour or whatever it is, and I'm just gonna like pour into the page whatever comes. I haven't gotten there, and that's like kind of my goal, I think, for the next phase of my writing journey, to be able to really carve out and like that time to intend to write, and not just sort of like haphazardly here and there.
I think it's interesting that you say that, because I think at one point, like, I think we are one or the other, and we can try to become more like the other. And yeah, because I think the disciplined writer often romanticizes the spontaneous writer and wishes they could pick up the notes app at any given point and just, burst out from the heart and bleed all over your notes app, metaphorically, of course. And then the disciplined or the chaotic, more spontaneous writer, glamorizes the consistent, disciplined writing. And I think they both exist, and there's pros and cons to both. But I don't think that necessarily one is better than the other. And I remember when I started writing very early on, and I felt like I had to write every day. It was just coming off of a National Poetry Writing Month. So I had been in the habit of writing every single day. This was maybe my first National Poetry Writing Month ever. Probably like 5 years ago, maybe, let's say, for good measure, maybe 6, who knows. And I remember thinking, like, I have to write every single day now. This is what writers do. This is what real writers do. And then I discovered Ocean Vuong, and I listened to one of his interviews.
Amazing.
And he blatantly admitted and told everyone that he writes at maximum 8 poems per year.
Wow. No way.
8 poems per year? Are you joking me? Like, no way. There's no way in hell. And no, like that's exactly what he said. And I remember thinking, if my favorite poet can write 8 poems a year, then maybe there's a little less pressure on me to write a poem every single day. And I think there's so much value in writing every day, by the way. Like, I think people who do that, and if you're listening and you write every single day, like, all the power to you. Don't stop that.
100%.
But I think there's so much to be said too for letting the poems come to you. And if they're not coming to you, not sort of forcing them, and not overly creating rigid boundaries and guidelines around something that is meant to perhaps be a little more free flowing and a little more spontaneous. And so that to me, like, was a lot of comfort. And do I sometimes still go periods of time where I write every day? Yeah, I do. But then when I don't for a week, I'm like, you know what? It's okay. Like, it's fine. It's going to come to me when it comes, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's an amazing little tidbit. I didn't know that. I mean, 8 poems a year is like, it feels almost like the opposite of the messaging you get when you are surrounded by poetry, especially poets like on Instagram, which is really the only like poetry community that I'm a part of, like social media wise. But just kind of noticing it's almost like a manic need to stay relevant, right? And again, a lot of it has to do with like trying to beat the algorithm and making sure that you keep showing up in people's feeds. But I noticed that a lot of times, like this manic need to produce, it for a lot of people, it yields like not so great poetry. Like for poets that are capable of producing like amazing work, the kind of the daily poem machine, right? That is like, and maybe they're doing it because they want to write. I don't know, right? But it does seem like the more poetry I see from people, and like the more frequently they're producing that poetry, the less likely it is that you'll find like that gem. Right. It just feels like a lot of writing, and I believe in this personally too. Maybe with the exception of people who write for a living, and this is something that they need for their income. I think that's like a whole other ball game, right? But like if you're writing as a hobby or as just kind of like a side, passion or passion project, I think that writing can be mostly private. And you can write every day or not write every day, but like a poem doesn't have to get produced every day. Like you could write for weeks and not have a poem, right? Whether you're journaling, whether you're just like I was doing, collecting lines, and you can still write, right? That's still writing. It's not congealing into maybe like a piece that you would say is complete, and that's okay, right? Like that has to be okay, because I imagine in all art forms, that's okay. Whether you're a musician or like a visual artist, if you're producing every single day or even just every week, um, I suspect the quality is going to suffer. Like there needs to be that moment, that ebb and flow, and that like retreating into the cave is like imperative, right? For something to come
100%.
out that's like special.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm with you on that. I notice it too. I think few things. Number one, the energy in that uh is noticed, I think, and you can tell when a poem has been written from a hurried energy, or an energy that is perhaps almost, and I know this word has bad connotations, and I don't mean it in the sense of like desperate for like any attention or anything, but sometimes I think that desperation to create a finished poem or a finished piece, like poems, I think fight against that. I think sometimes poems want to sit with you for weeks and they want to teach you something. And when you're wanting to get them out on the red carpet so quick, perhaps they're also freaking out and they're like, I don't want this yet. I'm not ready. And so sitting with that is like so important. And then I had a couple other thoughts. Oh, the idea that writing, that even if you're writing to not create a finished piece, that it's still really valuable. I think that is so important. And it reminds me of a conversation I had with my fiance Corey the other day. Last summer, I spent an entire week by myself at his cottage, and I wrote what I thought was going to be the start of sort of a lyrical essay collection, or maybe even a memoir, even though I'm too young to write a memoir. um,
Never too young to write a memoir.
that's very kind, but I personally don't think I would until I'm like at least 50.
Got to collect a little more trauma, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. But I wrote about 30,000 words in a week, and it was just the biggest like flow out of me that I've ever experienced in my life. I didn't really look at my phone during that week, and I just wrote. And I've never done anything with that. I've never turned that into anything. I've never submitted that anywhere. I've never took pieces from it and created an essay collection or anything like that. At the time, I thought I would. At the time, I was like, this is going to be amazing. This is going to be like an essay collection or something. I even talked to my agent about it, and it never really went anywhere. And I could easily look back at that and think like, what a waste, what a failure. You never finished that. That was, not worth anything. But I look back now and I'm like, I had a great time writing for an entire week. And there was so much that was in my head and in my heart that needed to come out. And maybe it'll take the form of, maybe one day I'll go back and read those things and I'll write a memoir about the half memoir I wrote when I was 26, you know, like you never know what something is going to lead to. But even if it doesn't lead to anything, I like proved to myself that I could write a lot in a short amount of time if I just put my like heart on the page and sat my ass in the chair and wrote. It was really cathartic. It was in a way therapeutic to explore a lot of my early childhood. I kind of documented everything I remembered from my childhood. And I think like, yeah, if I had forced myself to create a finished product from that, it would not have been good. And I look back now, like it wasn't even good writing, but the practice was that the point was I just wrote, I just spilled onto the page. And
Yeah.
I think if you're doing that throughout the week, and by the end of the week, you have 5 wonderful lines and no poem, like you have accomplished a lot. That is so valid and so worthy. And then also for sharing on social media, if anyone is listening, and wants to share on social media, I like totally understand. I think social media is such a valuable tool. One of my favorite tips and tricks, if you're feeling the need to share but you haven't written anything, is to reshare an old poem. I think give yourself permission to reshare and find new readers. Don't put pressure on yourself to always share new poetry. You can share poems that have been published in magazines. You can share, like reshare them. Who cares? Just do it. You know. I think there's pressure to share, and if you're not writing, then it can feel like you're behind. Give yourself grace. Give yourself permission to disappear for a few weeks. I promise you, like no one is going to forget about you if you come back after
100%.
a few weeks. We're just happy you're back. That's all that matters,
Yeah.
I think.
No, 100%. I think it's so true, unless you're really, really hell bent on like growing your fan base as quickly as possible. In general, there's so much value in that, like, you know, showing something to the world and then like disappearing for a little while, right? It's like that mystery of like, you know, you put out something that was valuable, maybe thought provoking, whether it's like, a poem or like a reel or whatever it is, and then it's okay to disappear for like a day or two or a week or whatever you need, right? And I personally, the poets that I follow, not that it's a ton of them, but I don't necessarily gravitate more toward the ones that are posting every day. They like, to me it's a lot more special sometimes when like a poet I really admire is just kind of like every once in a while popping up on my feed, and I'm like, ooh, I haven't heard from them in a while, and it's kind of like this. And sometimes I'll hear from a poet every day, and that's like great too, but it's not always like it's not always new work, right? And that balance of like, share a little bit of your life. You do that really well, Maria. I feel like your account is very much like that balance of, you're not pushing a new poem on us every day. It's like a little bit of a glimpse into your life, and like a cute dress that you're wearing, or like, your little tomato that you're slicing, right? But then also like, a poem every once in a while, and it could be something you wrote a long time ago, and that it like humanizes you, right? And it also, I think, gives you a little space to feel like I tapped in today, like I interact, I got my connection going without feeling like this, I needed to do something fresh and new and invent something today. So
Yeah.
definitely, yeah.
I feel that so hard. I agree. Like I have so many poet friends on Instagram that will post like a little once in a while, and I'm like, oh, like they're back, amazing, And then, again, it's really nice for the folks that do check in like every day. It is exciting to see your poem in the mornings on my feed while I'm having my coffee. I think like show up how it feels good for you, right? Like what
100%.
genuinely gives you like vigor and
100%.
excitement. And the instant it like doesn't feel good for you anymore, get the heck out of there. Like,
100%.
like where use, I think, your fun or your desire and how much fun you're having as your compass for, I guess, everything in life, to be honest
Everything.
with you. Not saying that you should always avoid hard things, because hard things can bring wonderful results and um wonderful fruit, I suppose. And sometimes things do have to marinate and grow in silence or whatever. But I think life should not be hard. Life should not feel like you're gritting your teeth the entire time. So if like things like social media or Substack or whatever it is related to the poetry space, even if you submit to Lip Magazine, you're like, I hate this so bad. It's like, just don't do it. Like no one's forcing you to.
Yeah.
What I've learned in my poetry career is that the path for poetry as a hobby, as a love, as a passion, as a business, as a career, there are like literally 10,000 ways to do it. And your path will be the way that you enjoy doing it the most. It's not going to look like anyone else's. And so in a way, it's kind of relieving because you don't have to follow anyone else's really advice. If it resonates with you, of course, you can take other people's advice. But if someone tells you, hey, this is how you grow on Substack, and you're like, I freaking hate Substack, just like close your ears. Like, don't even go there. Honestly.
The number of times I've started like exploring Substack, because I have an account. I realized I didn't think I had one, but I did sign up at one point, just like, like a Google sign up. And I go in every once in a while because I keep seeing it everywhere and everyone's asking me for like my Substack. And I'm like, I don't have a Substack. I don't understand it. How is it different? Do I need to have a newsletter? Like, what's happening here? And for me, it's just maybe like a new platform that I haven't wrapped my mind around. But I do feel that pressure sometimes. Like, if you're a poet, you have an Instagram and you have a Substack. If you don't have a Substack, you're not relevant. Like those kind of, not that anyone's saying that, right? But because that's what's trending, you start to feel kind of like, well, am I a writer then? If I don't have one, if I don't do this? And I totally echo what you're saying around like, do what feels good for you. If you want to be prolific and put out, and there are some people who like post a poem a day and they're all bangers. Jill that you interviewed earlier in the Gather Pod, I mean, she's one of them. Like, she'll come out with like a gem every single day, and you can kind of tell like there's like a joy in producing, and it doesn't feel like forced, right? And then there's some other accounts where like you said before, you can feel the energy that the post is coming into your feed with. And I remember when I first started following poetry accounts, I used to get really immersed. Like, there were few and far in between. I didn't follow a lot of poetry accounts initially, but every time a poem would pop up on my feed, I would read it start to finish, with that, like, indiscriminately. And now that I'm a little bit more immersed and I like follow more and more follow me, my whole feed is poetry. And I realize like I'm like doing a lot more scrolling and like skimming. And I'll do this thing where I'll like read the first line and the last line. And if that hasn't like hooked me, I just keep it, and like, I don't know if it's coming from a place of like, I'm oversaturated and I need a break, or my brain is like adapting to like, the feed, and like, it's just sort of optimizing like how quickly I'm ingesting this information. But, there's something to be said for like, even in your own personal feed, like even if you're a poet online, to like diversify a little bit or only go on at certain times of the day. I think oversaturation and being immersed in it constantly can have that like almost like desensitizing effect. I used to get a lot of inspiration on Instagram, and like I want to keep it that way, because a lot of times it would be like I read a poem and it like really spoke to me, and then it also inspired me to write something, because I really wanted to like maybe try to mirror that feeling, or that sometimes it's just something silly, like the structure of the poem like was like really cool, and I wanted to see if I could like reproduce that. And I don't want to lose that. And I think that we risk kind of our relationship to reading when we're also like when we're again oversaturating our exposure to it. So as poets, as a poetry community, also keeping keeping our feeds authentic, and keeping like not just for our own sake, right, but for the sake of the community, and really putting things out that feel good to us, and when we feel good to put them out, I think helps the entire community at large.
Yeah. Oh, like, shout that from the rooftops, girl. That's gold right there. Gold. I think the word you used was desensitization. I think that's so accurate. I think oftentimes when we are in like consumer mindset, like consuming poetry, then our creator brain shuts off, like when
Mhm.
it's too much. And I like to remind myself when I'm on social media that I'm there to read poetry, but I'm not a consumer. I am a creator, right? And using the pieces that we do read for inspiration instead of like kind of like numbing us, because I think there is a point where when you read too much poetry that it starts to feel flat or like one noted, and it's hard to appreciate the magic in 15 poems when you read them really quickly versus like really spending time with two or three. um, I don't really scroll that much on my feed anymore, to be honest with you, for that reason. Like, I find that I have like a certain set of poets that I really love, and I just go on their pages once in a while and like read what they have written, or I'll like buy their books when they have books coming out or something like that. I really love spending a lot of time with one poet at a time, and that's why I think. I mean, that's why poetry collections obviously exist, so you can do that. And it's not anything I've invented, but um, I love a book. I love a good book. I love buying someone's book and spending time with like 40, 50 of their poems at a time. And where sometimes when you see one poem on your screen, you're just getting a small little snapshot of who they are as a poet. And it's a lot harder, I guess, to like get to know them and to even support them. And I kind of like even in the Gather portal that we have our own little feed with our sharing and feedback. And it's like we have maybe like 10 poems a week. And it's like we can really spend time with those poems as poets, supporting each other because it's not oversaturated or like overwhelming.
Yes, I love that too. That was like my favorite feature, or is my favorite feature of the Gather portal. I don't always get to like get in and give feedback, but I'm always reading the poems. And what I find so special there, that's different from like a social media post, is that when you post on social media, I think there's like an understanding that like you're not gonna go on someone's poem that's posted on social media and like bash it, with the exception of a few trolls. They exist, right? But like, if you have nothing good to say, you'll probably not say it, or you'll just keep it moving. And most of your feedback is going to be, you pick out a line you really like, or you just go crazy over the poem as a whole. And in the Gather portal, I think it's like, I think there's a lot more vulnerability where you really are truly like not pretending you have a perfect product and looking for validation. It's really truly like, I hate this title. I don't like the way that I ended it. I need someone to like tell me a better way. And, and everyone comes in with such helpful suggestions, but also with such like kindness and love. And it doesn't ever feel like a critique or like it hurts your ego in any way. It's just truly like the best version of like constructive criticism that you could get. And I think it's like good training, right? Because when you're somebody who's only posting in one platform that's kind of geared toward harvesting likes, you don't ever feel like maybe opportunity to grow, right? Because your feedback is, well, this is a great poem, even if that feedback was not always authentic, right? I mean, sometimes we like something because like we like the person, or we like something because the poem as a whole was like cute, but whatever it is, right? You don't get that opportunity to look at it and say like, wow, like this was good, but this line was off, right? Or I could, that opportunity to improve your craft doesn't really exist on social media. So all that is to say that Gather is like a really nice space for that, where you could really try to open yourself up to critique, but like in a very safe way.
I'm really glad that it comes across that way and it's landing. I think that was kind of definitely the intention with it. I noticed that I think social media can sometimes be like an echo chamber of praise, and that's like not a bad thing, I don't think. I think it's just serves a different purpose in your writing career. Like what that does is it bolsters you with momentum to keep writing, and like, that's the purpose that it serves.
100%.
But to bolster your craft and to improve, absolutely you have to get vulnerable and open yourself up to feedback and to critique. And I think like finding a place to do that where it does feel safe is important, because I've heard lots of stories of writers asking for feedback in MFA programs and having professors tell them something like awful, and then they're discouraged from their entire, they're discouraged from keeping and continuing on their writing journey. And so I feel like it's like important to get feedback, but also to be critical about who you're getting feedback from, and making sure that that person has your best interest in mind. And because yeah, I personally have never experienced someone giving me, like, apart from internet trolls, which they exist, which sucks. That's just a part of social media. But my heart breaks when I hear of writers. And I always find it's women also, like, women are being critiqued for writing confessional poetry, or poetry about their mothers, or poetry about, like, God forbid, what it means to be a woman,
Right.
And so I feel like I just want to, like, send so much love to those folks, because when you have that experience, it is really hard to open yourself up again. And of course, social media, we don't want to do that on social media for everyone to see, right?
Yeah, there's definitely there's like layers of like gatekeeping that happens in the poetry world. And again, it depends on what circle you're in. But yeah, I agree that anyone anyone whose feedback is like, this isn't real poetry, because I would be wary of, right? Because I feel like once you have like a formulaic checklist, you're like missing the point. I definitely think that you're right, like there's something to be said for room to grow. We all have it. Some poetry is, I mean, I don't know, this is something that maybe we could talk about, but like I don't know, maybe there is an objectively good poem versus an objectively not so great poem, right? Like in terms of craft, right? I never went to an MFA program, so I have no idea what I'm talking about. But just like as a reader, right? Just like when you read a book or you read anything, you can kind of like, all right, this is a good book, this is not a good book. But like when you have a list of criteria for what a poem can be about or can't be about, or when you're kind of invalidating people's experience, because poetry isn't just like, here's something I've written, I've created, for your consumption. It's a lot of the time like you basically just pouring yourself out in like in the form of language, right, onto a page. And so when you critique someone and say that is not a valid kind of poem, you're essentially sort of saying like, your experience is not valid, right? Your being, whatever you're being is not valid. And yeah, I mean, as women, that that's historically been our critique, right? Like the invalidation of our experiences is rampant. And I power to the people that fight back. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, 100%.
And try to break those barriers. And if that means you don't, submit to like the really highbrow, lit mags, then so be it, right? If that means that you go with a publisher that, vibes with your type of poetry, whatever that may be, then let that be it. It doesn't mean that you are, not at the highest level you could be. It just means that you're not in that sphere, right? Like you're just not with that group. And I think the hierarchy is really problematic.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is so much room for the space to be met and shared in between. And I really think like the online poetry space and then the MFA poetry space, like I really think we all need to party together, to be honest. Like I think we all need to just go and hang out at a party together and realize that we're all poets, and we're all just...
Where did the MFA poets hang out?
In lit mags.
Like exclusively the 10 people who read lit mags are all
yeah. No, I think there's a sentiment around being on Instagram that that people think it devalues your work. And so if you're sharing your work on Instagram versus being published in lit mags, then perhaps folks view that as less like work that hasn't been publishable, perhaps. But I think that the argument on the flip side is much stronger, which is, why would you not want to find readers for your work? And where people actually do read poetry, which is Instagram. Nobody's reading poetry in Lit Mags, let's be real. Maybe some people are. I still get a subscription to all the Lit Mags that have published me, and I enjoy reading them, but I know that that's the exception. I don't think that most people are reading Lit Mags. But people do scroll on Instagram and they read poetry on Instagram. Like, statistically speaking, you can look at the poetry category on Instagram and people read poetry on Instagram. So part of my whole thing with the Lit Mag was, where can we publish poets where people actually read them, and then actually give them access to a small part of the social reach that we have on Instagram. Because, like, is that not the point of trying to find a home for your poems? If we're viewing publishing as finding a home for your poems, do you not want a home where people can see your work, can connect with your work, can instantly click on your profile and send you an email if they want and tell you that they loved your work? And also share that work with their audience as well. And that's why we publish collaboratively, so that people can share it and their friends and their family who follow them can read their work. And to me, that's like, I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, of course. But, I think that's the purpose. That's the whole point, is like people to read your work. And so I think like there's room for those two worlds to meet. And I feel like part of my purpose with perhaps Gather and the podcast and the Lit Mag and everything is just like finding equal ground, equal space in the publishing world, and realizing like there's so much power when poets come together and decide in community to create a space that's open, inviting, that shares work, that's not gatekeeping, that's not closing off access to publication because someone hasn't been published in the Paris Review, something like that. I just think there's so much room for growth there, and I'm learning every single day, obviously, but I feel like that's my mission and my purpose. And it's happening, girl. It's happening.
It is, and it's a beautiful thing. It truly, I thought it was very innovative when I first like even heard about it. Before I think I actually submitted to get published, and I don't think, maybe twice or something. And I just remember thinking it was like such an innovative approach, right? That you're not putting out like a separate Lit Mag that then like you also have an Instagram page for, that the publishing happens on the page. And it's just it's innovative. And like you said, I think because it's already tied to like a community that you're also running, where people can grow their craft and build connection, it does feel very inclusive. It does, like I know so many people who like follow Gather Poets and aren't even poets. So, it's just like a very welcoming space. And little plug for Gather Poets. A lot of really amazing a lot of really amazing poetry published on there. Check them out.
Thanks, Alina. That's so kind. I honestly think that we happen to magically have just like attracted the coolest people in the world to our writing table. And I just thank my lucky stars that no strange, creepy people have joined.
And now that you've said that, the universe will flip the script on you.
Oh, shit. Oh, my goodness. Well, I just want to say that talking with you has been so refreshing, Alina. I love the way that you think about poetry, and I love the way that you approach your writing routine in like this sort of spontaneous, but also very thoughtful way. I think those two things are not mutually exclusive. And I just want to say thank you for sharing the writing table with me every week, and also for being on the podcast. For anyone that's listening, we're going to be publishing Alina's poem on the Friday of the week that this podcast drops. So stay tuned for that. If you are on Substack, you're one of those people that does love Substack. We have recently started also sharing our weekly publication on Friday as a newsletter. So some folks have said that their Instagram feed is not one they want to come to once a week to check out a poem. So totally get that if you're not into Instagram anymore and you want to be on Substack. You can find that on gatherpoets.com or anywhere on the socials. The links are everywhere. Alina, I wanted to ask you, where
Mhm.
can folks find you, connect with you, your social media, maybe like what would you, and maybe some final famous last words.
um famous last words. I am on Instagram. You could find me at Alina K, that's KAY 66. And stop by, say hello. I'm very friendly, and I love to interact with other writers and humans. And um yeah, thank you, Maria.
Yeah, thank you, Alina. It's a funny story. I did the exact same thing with my personal Instagram too. I turned it into my poetry. And you lose a few friends who are not into your poetry over time, but the real ones stick around for sure. Well, this
100%.
was fun, Alina. Um, I'll pass it off to everyone else in the audience who is listening. Make sure you check out Alina's work and stay tuned for her poem on Friday. And have a wonderful whatever day, time of night you're listening. We will see you all in 2 weeks. Ta ta.